Hello everyone, my name is Sophie Orpen, and as Valerie just said, I am the Archive Research Coordinator at the Henry Moore Foundation. I'm so pleased to be here today to speak about the work that we do, as well as hearing about all of the other fantastic artist institutions who are represented here. As the title suggests, I can only begin telling the story of the Henry Moore Archive by going back to the very beginning, because it really is the product of the artist's legacy, and it's important to understand the man behind the collection as a result. Henry Moore was born in 1898 in Castleford, Yorkshire, in the north of England. As the second youngest of a coal mining family of 8, Moore's background was very humble. He was encouraged into a good education by his father, and as a result, Moore was very aware of the choices that he made and the impact that they would have on his career. So, for example, although he always wanted to become a sculptor, his father had encouraged him to study to become an art teacher first. This way, he would have a career and a salary to fall back on. And this outlook on his work enabled Moore to start making his first move into creating what we now know as the Henry Moore Archive in 1928. 1928 was a significant year for Moore, as it was the year of his first solo show at the Warren Gallery in London. This exhibition was of significant size, showing 42 sculptures and 51 drawings, and received a lot of media attention. It was from this point onwards that Moore subscribed to Durrance, the press cutting service, to keep track of the public reception of his artwork. And the key fact to note at this stage is that not all of this attention was necessarily flattering. In fact, some of it was downright nasty, with headlines such as "Distortions in Stone, Sculpture that Displeases," and phrases to the tune of "The mutilated breast of the woman is revolting." However, Moore's determination to keep a true record of this public reception is what has made our archive what it is today. Moore worked and lived in London for around 20 years until the reality of the Second World War forced him and his wife Irina from their home in Hampstead to a tiny little village named Perry Green in Hertfordshire, around 30 miles north of London. It was here that Moore spent the rest of his life and ultimately founded the Henry Moore Foundation in 1977. Prior to the establishment of the foundation, the day-to-day life in Perry Green was busy yet basic in terms of facilities. Moore's family home, Hoglands, doubled up as office space and became the centre of administrative activity for the production of his artwork. As a result, a variety of what we will now classify as archive items and material were produced, such as correspondence, record of sales, and photography of sculptures for exhibition and sale purposes. David Mitchinson, who was a former assistant of Moore's and later head of collection and exhibition at the foundation, started working in Hoglands in 1968, and he said of this time, "What Hoglands provided for Moore was an attractive, unpretentious base to carry out the business of being a sculptor, a happy home where an uncomplicated domesticity never interfered with work, a simple office structure that dealt with production, sales, exhibitions, publications, appointments, and public relations." At the beginning, Moore's storage of this now incredibly valuable material was haphazard at best. His first secretary, Tam Miller, who you can actually see here using bellows with Moore in his first experiment in terms of casting at home, which I think is amazing that his secretary got involved with that. But she said that he used to keep all of his letters in envelopes in a bottom drawer, and it took me about 3 years to persuade him to have a filing cabinet, which I collected from London in my Morris Minor. However, Betty Tinsley's arrival to Hoglands in 1957 brought structure and order to the office. Mrs. Tinsley worked as Henry Moore's full-time secretary from this point up until his death in 1986, and for the Henry Moore Foundation until 1989. She ensured that each letter typed from this point forward had a copy for the office archive, a fact of which we are very grateful for today, as they proved to be an invaluable source of Moore's working and often personal life. The filing system for other paperwork that was used from this point onwards was also created by Mrs. Tinsley. However, this structure was not always straightforward, with it being noted that her unique system of categorising events continues to intrigue scholars today. Due to space being an issue in Hoglands, Irina's dress boxes were utilised as correspondence and document storage, as well as for Moore's ever-growing collection of press cuttings. These were stored in a large cupboard in the stairway, and as the youngest in the office, David would often be sent to crawl through the cupboard to retrieve different items, which is very different from the way we retrieve items from the store today. And as reluctant to adopt business-like structure to his day-to-day work as Moore was, there was simply no choice to do so after the founding of the Henry Moore Foundation in 1977. David Mitchinson described the establishment of the foundation as a peculiarly English affair which could have happened the same way nowhere else. Ultimately set up in order to protect his home, his artwork, and his legacy for the foreseeable future, Moore employed one of Britain's top lawyers, Lord Goodman, to assist in this, at the time, completely unique venture. Looking into the creation of the foundation is extremely important as it demonstrates how embedded the archive was into the original plans laid out by Moore. It is stated in an unautographed memorandum of February 1977 that it is intended that the foundation establishes in the environs of Henry Moore's home a centre at which a permanent display of his works will be housed, and a staff will be employed whose activities will include the establishment of archives and documentation of Mr. Moore's work and philosophy. Moore also wrote in his own words that one of his aims for the foundation was to maintain or support a library or modern information service on world sculpture from the earliest times to the first half of the 20th century, to include the preservation, acquisition and study of my own material, including books, photographs, films, and to publish books, photographs, videotapes, slides, etc. for educational and general viewing, all to encourage a further appreciation of sculpture. Around this time, Daintree House, a former residential home next to Hoglins, became available for purchase, and it's this one here, and Hoglins is there. And so the offices of the newly formed Henry Moore Foundation were established there. And the creation of the foundation also brought the commission of the Henry Moore Bibliography. This project, mainly pushed forward by Moore's daughter Mary, was fronted by Alexander Davis, who is this man here. Davis was employed as Moore's bibliographer, and so began a 14-year-long project to compile the 5-volume Henry Moore Bibliography that was eventually published in 1991, 5 years after the artist's death. This bibliography became the backbone of our bibliographic collection to this day and formed the basis of our current cataloguing system. The collating process was helped along by the fact that Moore had assigned all of his copyright rights over to the foundation. The foundation were granted the permission of the final say over the use of Moore's word and images, and as a result were able to easily obtain copies of publications, photographic material, films, etc. for the archive collection. This move was very unique at its time, and although seemingly fairly drastic, meant that from this point onwards the archive collection was able to grow from strength to strength. The rapidly growing collection was beginning to cause problems within the ever-expanding estate. The archive collection, the physical landscape of the foundation, and Moore's legacy have interesting parallels. With each year and with more exposure and recognition, more material was being produced about the artist, and with every piece of artwork sold, Moore was able to purchase land and or properties surrounding his home in Perry Green. As an avid collector of books himself, Moore's home and studios were already overflowing with publications, either purchased by himself or given as gifts by many of his visitors over the years. Daintree House was also becoming less suitable for the job of housing archive material as office spaces grew with the growing number of staff. Soon, an alternative storage area for the bibliographic archive was proposed. Tearfield, which is here, another former residential property that was situated across the road from Hoglins, had been owned by Moore since 1964, and it was fitted with shelving to accommodate this extremely large collection. And by the beginning of the 1980s, it had become the official library for both staff and researchers. Ironically, even after the establishment of an official archive building, space was still limited. Tearfield, as a small residential property, did not have the space nor structure to withhold such a substantial collection. Shelves of books, plus many piles on the floor that had appeared after the shelving space had run out, had created a situation where the timbers of the building were dangerously under strain, putting the structure of the property, the collection, and any researchers at risk. The decision was made to use another form of residential building on the estate as overflow for the archive collection, and that building was named Elmwood, which is where the current Henry Moore archive exists to this day. When this property was purchased by Moore in 1983, it was listed as a 4-bedroom family house. On a slightly larger scale, Elmwood had the potential to house the entire bibliographic archive without the use of any overflow buildings and risk of disaster. There was also just enough room for staff and a small research space, enabling the collection to be somewhat accessible to those who wished to view it. But by 2013, the Henry Moore Foundation were finally in a position to be able to remodel Elmwood into a purpose-built archive building. This decision had been over 40 years in the making and would be able to provide stores that could house the entire collection for the first time, including photographic material which had previously been stored separately across the estate. This redevelopment, designed by Hugh Broughton Architects, would see the addition of 4 purpose-built archive stores, each varying in temperature and humidity depending on which element of the collection it was to house, as well as the fitting of air controlling system into an existing store in the older part of the building. The addition of a spacious and immersive reading room opened up the possibility of being able to promote research opportunities and increase our educational activities programme. This redevelopment took several years and required the removal of the entire archive collection, which is about over 750,000 items, from the original Elmwood building. I joined the Henry Moore Archive in April 2017 at a pivotal time in the archive's history. Conditions within the stores were just about to stabilise and material was getting ready to be moved back in after almost 3 years in temporary storage. I will forever be grateful that I was able to start my journey at the Henry Moore Foundation at this stage. I had the entirely unique opportunity to see every piece of the archive individually as it was being moved back in. Both publications and audiovisual material were cleaned prior to them being moved back into the archive stores to remove any dust and pests that may have accumulated over the 3 years in temporary storage. This was vital to prevent contamination of the brand new archive stores. Items were then conservation checked against the existing catalogue listing, and shelf locations were created for their new positions in the stores. The movement of archive items also gave us the opportune chance to review our existing conservation practices against current industry guidelines. Many archive items were still stored in the way they had been during Moore's lifetime. For example, correspondence was in hanging files from filing cabinets, often with rusty paper clips and staples, which is an archivist's nightmare. A large part of the bibliographic archive, periodicals, as well as many of the exhibition catalogues, had historically been stored in cardboard magazine files, and new boxes were ordered for the whole of the collection, which were constructed with acid-free cardboard, and old plastic folders were replaced for archive-friendly men-and-neck sleeves. This was particularly important, as we noticed while rehousing items in the old sleeves that ink from the printed documents was actually sticking and transferring, and if we'd left them any longer, then much of it would have been illegible. Alongside reviewing our storage policies, we've also focused on digitisation of collections. This has not only been for the expansion of our digital presence, which has grown substantially in recent years, but also for preservation. This has been particularly important with collections such as correspondence, as the paper used in many of the letters is extremely fragile and will not withstand repeat handling from staff and researchers. As a result, a collection of over 32,000 letters and documents from Moore's lifetime are all now searchable on an index catalogue that can be called up incredibly easily at a researcher's request on a PC in our reading room. With select areas of our collection now going online, we've had to consider the effects that this would have on how research is conducted. As the research coordinator, I assist those who wish to study Henry Moore and advise on the suitable material for their research. It is vital that the work that I do, that our collections and the archive are accessible as possible for anyone who wishes to see them. However convenient online content may be, the Henry Moore Archive presents the unique opportunity to study Moore in the environment that he lived, worked and curated. It's that reason that in an increasingly digital age, we encourage the archive study as the integral method of understanding Moore. In our outreach work, we're also encouraging those who may have never used an archive before to visit and learn about our collections. This is particularly aimed towards students who are about to embark on university education and other forms of further study. We aim to provide a non-intimidating introduction to archives, and this use of Moore's material can ultimately be seen as a way of his legacy and his philosophy extending to future generations. Moore said in an interview in 1957, "Everything I do is intended to be big." And although he was undeniably talking about his working process for sculpture at this point, a parallel can be seen with the legacy that he's left behind. The Henry Moore Archive is, to our understanding, one of the largest archives on a single artist in the entire world, a unique experiment that has now become a blueprint for many other artists' estates. At the heart of this development has undoubtedly been the archive and Moore's vision for it, driving us forward to the establishment of our new archive stores and reading room. We hope to continue this development of Moore's wishes by continuing to provide engaging and immersive projects that enable people to understand the man behind the collection. Thank you.